One, two, three. Here we go. Ready? Are we set?
We're set. We're good.
Welcome back, Volume 2, Wednesday. Who cares about the Civil War?
That was the strangest introduction, but all right, let's go with it.
Well, why do the same thing all the time? That
Well,
gets
that's true.
boring.
It does get boring.
Because life is repetitive enough, right?
Right, yep.
Yeah.
I don't want to repeat of my
Who
defeat.
cares? We just rewound. Who cares about the Civil War?
You mean the wall between the states?
The
The wall of northern aggression?
Oh, it's even funnier when a Southerner has a bad Southern accent. So I got to thinking about this because we just passed the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
Yep.
Is the great liberation of Europe and a turning point in World War II was passed, and I have, oh my goodness, now I'm beginning to feel old because I remember when Ronald Reagan stood there on the beaches at Normandy on, I believe, the 40th anniversary at a pivotal moment in history as we were staring down the Soviet Union after many years of a Cold War, which of course was directly connected to World War II, and I just got to thinking, who even truly understands or cares anymore? You know, it's not someone's fault that they were born in 2000, and so D-Day doesn't have the same relevance it did to certainly someone who lived through it or his family was in it, or even someone like me I grew up around these World War II vets, and so by extension, I got to thinking about who cares about the Civil War, which is now 160 years distant as we push toward the anniversaries of Spring Hill, Franklin, and everything 1864 related. The men who fought in World War II were as removed from the Civil War as we are from World War II. And it just really got me to, as I think about the past, I think about the future. What's the future of a place like Franklin, Spring Hill, Rippavilla, Gettysburg, Vicksburg? Why does anybody care? Or the question maybe I'll pose to you, young professor, is why should anyone care? Why does it matter?
Why does the war matter?
Why does any of it matter? Why do we have to talk about slavery? Why do we have to talk about the Battle of Franklin? The sort of questions that we get that aren't even necessarily one's based in a critical approach. It's just, why does this matter? Why does D-Day matter? I think this is really more about who cares about the Civil War versus who cares about history. And so, because I've been getting that question a lot.
Right.
And then we just passed this anniversary, and I was asking myself the question, so why? Why?
Why? I like the big, loaded question to start out.
Isn't that what it is on society? It's not about the details. It's about that event.
Right.
And why is it important?
Well, if you're looking at just the Civil War, it's the war that saves the nation, allows the experiment in American liberty and this chance at self-government function and continue to function, because the nation doesn't exist if not for the Civil War. So you have to have it. It's this vital piece of the nation's early founding. We have to solidify 80 years from the founding who we are and what we could be. And so you have to have the war then to make the nation as it is. It doesn't exist without the Civil War. And so then by extension, the same guys who go ashore on June 6, 1944, maybe that looks completely different if the Civil War doesn't happen or it happens a different way. Or, I was asked to muse about this very thing. I like that muse by Chris Mikowski for Emerging Civil War. And somebody asked me on my tour, do you think any of this was worth it? Well, absolutely it was worth it. But it didn't come from a place of, I can't believe there's all these dead men and it all happened because of this, this, and this. Was it all even worth it? This was a genuine question. A woman was struggling to try and figure out if 700,000 dead, all the bullet holes in the farm office, anything like that was worth what we have today. So now I'm going to turn around. You asked me a question. I'm going to throw it back to you.
So I had the strangest I had the strangest reaction to the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And that's why I've been thinking about this now. Because what is it today? The 10th, 11th? It's only been a few days. And how it relates to the war. Because I saw something happening at Normandy. Actually, I watched an interview. Tom Hanks was being interviewed because, of course, Hanks was involved with Band of Brothers. And, of course, he was in Saving Private Ryan. And he hadn't been there in 15 years. And he was really talking about the importance of it. But there was this other side story going on. And it was about these old men. These guys that were 100, 102. And Hank said, he'd met some of them. He said, please don't get out of your wheelchair. And there was this focus on they were brave and they were heroic. Okay, I get it. Isn't that a little bit of what we do often with the Civil War? And it seemed odd to me that for the first time that I could remember, Normandy wasn't about why it was important in the event as much as it was now just about the remaining men. And I wonder what's going to happen in a few years when they're gone, because then it got me to thinking about in a few days, well, a couple of weeks, there will be all of these just crazy fawning, this pilgrimage, this wave of people that are going to go to Gettysburg. And they're going to talk about the first day and the second day and Lee and Pickett's charge and Little Round Top.
And how brave they
are. The 20th Maine and how brave they are. And I wonder how many of those people will never go to the cemetery.
Yeah.
And think about what Lincoln said that day. And I wonder how many of the people who were thinking about Normandy were thinking about midway between the event and what we just went through. Reagan was there, and we were trying to still deal with the Soviet Union. And and some of this is the super sort of dense stuff that often I involve myself in because I'm trying to figure out how to relate our history. And I guess I was troubled by seeing Normandy turn into the Civil War. In
the sense that we're just so removed from it that now
the
veterans are fading away.
It's really becoming something that is exclusively historic. And what does it mean? And sadly, I think that we're losing touch with how terrible the Nazis and the Japanese were. Similarly to how terrible slavery was. And we've made excuses for that for 160 years. And God, I hope we don't do that with World War II. That we get so far from it that we just forget how important it really was. And interestingly, I think we're coming back to that on the Civil War. I think we're finally acknowledging slavery, the threat to the Union, the threat to the United States, and how close the experiment came to folding up. And then running back in the other direction, if the United States collapsed in the 1860s...
There is no global superpower to fight the Second World War.
I don't know I don't know how anybody could have offered the strength and resolve and basically power.
The industry,
Industry, power in flesh and power in steel that we had. That would never have happened. So I was bridging the Civil War to World War II to right now. And I was like, oh my God, this is so important. And I just want to stand on the side of the road and, wave a sign and say, come learn more, because I feel I'm not some flag waving patriot, but this is a great country. This is an incredible country with tremendous opportunity. There's a reason you've heard me say, there's a reason people still want to come here. There's a reason they break the law to come here. We almost lost it 160 years ago, and then the world almost ripped it away from everybody. The world, well, you know what I mean. That the world was imperiled in the late 30s and 40s. And we were just talking before we started filming, and now people complain about the fact that they have to sit in line at Starbucks or Chick-fil-A, and they're like, oh, I'm so worried. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow. And I'm like, imagine sitting in the English Channel on June 5th, or it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon on November 30th, 1864. It's like the perspective And I want to just, grab like the collective people and say, just take a minute. Just take a minute and think about why this is important. That's why I always read the Declaration of Independence on the 4th of July. It's my opportunity to, once again, tell the king to kiss off, but it's also a fun opportunity to realize how important that is, that's the genesis and the path to, we got problems today.
Yeah.
But we didn't get here without a lot of pain and suffering and struggle and bloodshed. And I don't know, who cares about the Civil War? I guess everybody should.
Everyone should.
Everyone should. You know what Robert Hicks said years ago to me, and among many things that Hicks said? It was right before he talked to a group, which he said to them, he goes, I'm going to hit one point that I was just thinking about. I was like, what's that? And he goes, the Civil War is important to anyone who moved to this country in the last 10 years as it is to anyone who lived here in the 1850s and 60s. And I thought, wow, he's right. Because if it had descended into anarchy and chaos, the United States wouldn't exist as it does today. My family would have had my family came here after the war. They would have had no country like this to move to. And the multitude of people who live in this country have now come here since the Civil War. Maybe that's why it's important. Because it allowed the experiment to mature, right? To blossom.
You can still tinker with
to
it.
Face.
And you can improve it, and you can make it change to meet the thing that you need.
Yes, the thing that you need. To stare real Nazis in the face. Real Nazis. Guys who wore swastikas and were killing Jews by the millions. To stare that in the face. We couldn't have done it had the Civil War not turned out the way that it did. And then, ironically, I think even among former Confederates, the greatest, I think, contribution they made to the American experiment was, and I'm talking rank and file Johnny Rebs, is they became Americans again.
Yeah. They left the war behind and didn't continue to fight it out.
The ones who weren't refighting it in the Southern Historical Society paper. Right, you know what I mean.
Right, yeah.
The guy who stayed home in Lowndes County, Alabama, and just raised his family.
Yeah.
And tried to be a good citizen again. Wow, that's why I was watching these old dudes, like 100 years old, and thinking, Hanks made the point that it's been 80 years, so if you were 17 or 18 and somehow you slipped in right there at the end, you're still 97 or 98. And he said, in a decade, they'll all be gone except for just a few.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow.
It does make you think about some of that echoes of the blue and gray footage of the Civil War veterans.
1937.
Yeah.
Especially at Gettysburg.
Yeah. Or there's even, there's great pictures. 1942, I think it was in Alabama, where it was Michigan. It was the Michigan National Guard Armory. And there's these like 3 or 4 Federal Army veterans and they're standing next to a brand new 30 caliber Browning light machine gun. And later in the day they went for a drive in a Jeep. And like you think about the distance for them and the distance for us, certainly, but how many of those men in 1942 or 1937, as you mentioned, were looking back 80 years on and saying, what are we going to do 10 years from now when they're gone? How do we talk about them in 1951 or 20 years later in 1961?
My experience,
And is that the memory that you want of them too? Because this came up in a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, is do you try to remember these men as they sat there in 2024 in wheelchairs covered up in blankets, and they didn't look quite like, in our mind, the supermen that went off and fought the war in 1941.
Well, so there was an overriding issue that I mentioned yesterday, because we had a staff meeting yesterday, and so you just reminded me, as I was looking at some of those old men sitting in wheelchairs with blankets on them, because it always seems like Normandy's cold.
They're also just old.
I know, but it always seems like it's windy and blustery there. It's like San Francisco. It never really seems very warm. But I was thinking about what was happening was we were focusing on the soldiers. And this was something that a guy we both know had posed a couple of weeks ago to me, and also I think he made a post about it on his Substack page about why is it that we as Americans focus on why the soldiers fought in the American Civil War versus how we look at all other wars. So yes, we were honoring those old men at Normandy, but nobody was really asking them, hey, why did you fight?
Right.
That was a distinct difference. And that also caused me some reflection, because I think we've tortured ourselves about the American Civil War as if it mattered what the heck any Johnny Reb or Billy Yank thought about anything. And nobody asks those World War II vets that question, because everybody knows the answer. I said yesterday, do you think anybody's ever asked about why was this British soldier fighting at Bunker Hill?
Right.
Nobody talked, but
Right.
we do it with the war. So interestingly, 80 years from Normandy and 160 years from the war, I think somewhere we're getting back to analyzing the American Civil War, its importance, versus why the soldiers fought. Because some of those guys are just born at the wrong time.
Right.
They don't have a choice. Same in World War II. There's a big thing unfolding that pulls these young men in. And so I was just once again thinking about nobody stuck a microphone in front of the old guy and said, hey, what caused you to fight?
Right. Right.
And I think, interestingly enough, I don't remember anybody asking Federal and Confederate veterans those questions.
It's only after they're gone.
It's only after they're gone, or people just never made it an issue while they were alive, because the lost cause was...
It was its own little machine working that off to the side.
Yeah. But once they were gone, then, well, now it's the 20th century and the centennial. And so I still think we're in a good place, in the vein of history, as far as the war goes. But I do think it's incumbent on us and anybody watching is to challenge people to just think about it. It isn't challenging about you're right or you're wrong. It's challenging people to think about the importance of the American Civil War, and not about, whether you have bloodline connection or whether you're a member of some, heritage organization, whatever that is. Why is the war important? I had to remind someone the other day, a guest was, and he was a very nice guy, but I said, sometimes I have to remind people, so I'm going to do it to you, and I hope you take this in the spirit in which it's intended. We live in the United States of America, and we're pretty darn lucky, because this country almost collapsed 160 years ago. And all of us should probably take a moment to, thank everyone who has fought to defend this country and stood up for it at its moments of greatest peril. Like those old men sitting there in wheelchairs on a beach 80 years after, almost, next year will be 80 years since the war ended. And I guess closing thought is, we still live in the 21st century in the shadow of the Civil War, domestically especially. And we live in the shadow of World War II globally to this day. And of course, the revolution spawns the whole thing. But the Civil War and World War II, the older I get, the more I see how very closely they connected they are for entirely different reasons. And I love it. I just love it. I love being able to talk to people about it. And I think the only thing that struck me the other day as I watched the old guys was, I always wish I could have met a Civil War vet. Just one or two, maybe one from each side. Like, I'd want to ask the Confederate, what did you really think? What did you really believe? And I might ask the other guy the same question, because I don't think the answers were remotely the same.
Yeah. My great affinity for Robert Penn Warren, right towards the end of The Legacy of the Civil War, this little booklet, he says, talking about America's place in the world by 1961. He talks about World War II, and he said, neither the Kaiser nor the Fuhrer read the right history books. And, it's just so perfect of a way, I think, to kind of wrap up all this discussion, is that if you're coming out of the Civil War, as a nation, we're supplanted ourselves on the world stage. And then come the Second World War, all right, you have this incredible reputation, this incredible industrial might. Now you have to use it to do the right thing. And we did.
Yeah.
And it's not above, and it's not an overstatement to say that the United States and its allies saved the world from Nazism and tyranny.
Well, and that's true. And then today you hear people talk about this is the most divided we've been since the American Civil War.
Which is why I loved what you said yesterday, is take a minute and realize just how bad it was in 1860.
Yeah, how bad it was. There were 4 million people enslaved, and we were divided geographically. Mm-hmm. And most of the geographic divisions were where the particular members of a party were. So the Republicans were in the North, and the Democrats were in the South. That is not, there's still some regionality, obviously.
Right.
New York is more liberal than Tennessee, and Tennessee is more conservative than, Minnesota.
Right.
But it's not as divided. And I think that the perspective is important, but the perspective of the past is important because it tells you where we are. But we do face internal domestic issues that must be addressed. And we now also face global issues that must be addressed. And you see the past still talking to us. Elections, who's the president, Russia, war, who's going to be on which side. So history can teach us lessons. They are guideposts for the future, if we're willing to pay attention. But if you're going to drive the car and not pay attention, you may end up going right off the road. And that hopefully never happens. But that's why it's incumbent on, I think, people saying what they believe and not being afraid of it. There's a difference between being rude and being honest.
Right.
There's a difference between opinions and facts, right?
Right.
And I still think we're in a great place, but this, 160 years ago, a presidential election of tremendous importance.
Yep.
And we've got one coming up that is going to be tremendously important. So the past still talks to us, and it is important. And the 4th of July. Well, the 3rd is really cool, because that's the day it actually comes out. That's the day it's voted on. Isn't that a great scene?
Yeah.
Is that a great scene in
John Adams?
In the John Adams series? It's incredible.
Yeah.
And then they print it on the 4th, or release it on the 4th. Imagine being in that room.
I have a feeling we're going to have to do an episode on the Declaration of Independence in July 4th.
Talk about anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about the anxiety, worrying, and just, what am I going to do?
Yeah, except only they sign their names to a document that if they're found out, they're hanged. Yeah. They were pretty anxious, too.
Yeah. Or hanging might have been the easy route.
Right. Executing.
They might have put them on a rack.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was ultimately, New York abstained. 12 states, and how many reps did each one have? 2?
2, yeah.
So 24 men.
No, I thought 3.
Is it 3? Okay,
it's
30.
3.
Is it 36 then?
I think that.
Okay, it's a small group. It's
anywhere from 24 to 36.
It's a little boys' club of troublemakers speaking to the future. And their voices can still be heard if you listen. And that is why history is really important. So it is just like your family's history, your father, your mother, your grandparents, the ancestor who got off the boat or whatever, that's all important to you. That's all part of the great matrix that is the United States.
That's why I love Christy saying that it's a symphony. We can get on Christy about a lot of things, right?
She says symphony a lot.
But she nails it when she says that every single piece of our story makes up an instrument within this grand kind of orchestra. And when we play, the music, it sounds different without one or two of these pieces. So yes, it might be brutal. Yes, it might be terrible. Yes, it could be depressing and dark and difficult history to deal with, but you have to have that little piece.
You know what? In 1861, the world was looking at the United States, wondering if it would devolve into civil war and chaos and destruction.
And he understood that perfectly.
163 years later, the world is looking to the United States once again, as it was 80 years ago, for leadership and sincerity, honesty, decency. And it's time, I think, for us to remember the past so that we can head into, once again, a better future. That's why the history of the war is important. So who cares about it? I do.
Everyone should.
You should.
There we go.
You should.
I already do.
You
I work
don't
here.
care enough about the Civil War.
Yeah, well, the results of our
Yes,
trivia
that's
show
right.
probably.
You and I both moved halfway across the country to end up here, so I guess we do. The guests who visit do.
Yeah.
All of you should spread the word. Now, it's a great time of year to do it.
It is.
It is
Summer's great, and then come in the fall. Time for the anniversary. No time like being in Franklin. And
We do it
spring and the fall.
365 days a year, but
Yep.
history it's who we are.
Yep.
We are the products of the past. So with that, Professor, 26 minutes and 4 seconds in. We'll see if anyone makes it to the end of this video. But thanks for watching, everybody.